Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone is a special guest to me, but I'm joined by a especially special guest, Dr. Angela. I call her Angie. I was going Angela Hattery. Now, this great professor used to work with me at George Mason, but she has now moved up north to the University of Delaware. But her work is transcendent of that distance, and she's doing things across the nation that I definitely wanted to feature on this podcast. She is an innovator in realm of women and gender studies, and also an advocate for racial equity. And so that was something that really stood out. I wanted to give her a platform on my show, but also just have a conversation about her latest edition of her new book, Policing Black Bodies. But before we get into this episode, good doctor, can you give a little bit of an explanation or our introduction of you that I left out?
Sure. Well, first of all, Philip, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you, even though we're now across the miles, but I guess this is how everyone's doing it during COVID. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to chat. I don't know that there's a lot that you left out, other than to say that I certainly enjoyed almost 10 years at George Mason and am now at the University of Delaware, working in women and gender studies and co-directing a new center for the study and prevention of gender-based violence. And I'm excited that we can still continue to work together, even from different institutions.
I love that. So, maybe for the listeners, obviously, I didn't say what you obtained your doctorate in, your discipline. Can we go back to the start? Yeah, what is your discipline? And maybe briefly, how did you get into that? Because I know there's so many realms in academia. You can study anything, right? There's so many things to study and curiosity. So how did you get into your discipline?
No, that's a great question. So I have a PhD in sociology, which I earned at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. My BA and master's are also in sociology. So I just sort of found the home and stuck with it, which is not everybody's pathway. I think what really drew me to sociology is that I had always been sort of intrinsically curious and concerned and wanted to understand different forms of social inequality. So if, we don't have to go all the way back. I'm not lying on the couch in the psychiatrist's office, but if we go back to when I was a kid, pretty early on, I realized that it seemed to me like girls didn't get the same opportunities that boys got. I had a fantastic teacher in the fourth grade who was a Black woman, which was very unusual where I lived. And she talked about segregated movie theaters when she was growing up. And it just didn't make sense to me. In high school, I went to a Catholic school, and there was a lot of anti-gay and lesbian kind of rhetoric. And I didn't understand that. Like, it just didn't make sense to me that that people were treated differently and were offered different opportunities. And so when I was in college, what I found was that sociology was one of the disciplines where you could talk about that, where we were reading books and having classroom discussions, and where it was kind of okay to study that. And so I think that's what really drew me in. It was a field where you could ask difficult questions about things that didn't make sense to me and that I wanted to understand.
I love that. So we also talked about the importance, me and you offline, about mentorship and guidance. So while you were going through your discipline, who were some people that you looked up to, or also particularly in your program looked for guidance?
That's a great question. Yeah, mentorship is super important. There were the obvious people, like my dissertation advisor. Her name is Emily Kane. She's a fantastic gender scholar who allowed me as a student to, study what mattered to me. She didn't try to put me in a box. She didn't try to recreate me. to be a little mini her. She looked for ways to help me, reach the things that I wanted to reach, study the things I wanted to reach. In fact, I often tell a funny story to the folks that I mentor. Um, I was taking classes with her. I read this particular book that I think I read it twice and still didn't understand it. Wrote my dissertation, went off to my first job. And I can remember not physically, viscerally sitting in my office, trying to turn my dissertation into a book. And all of a sudden, this light bulb goes off in my head that I think that the answer to the whole argument is in this book that I didn't understand when I read it in graduate school. So I walked over to my shelf, I took it off my shelf, I opened it up, and it was like, boom, there was the answer to the whole story. Like that was the key to the entire argument. And I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, why didn't you tell me when I was writing my dissertation? Why didn't you tell me that I was missing the key? And she said, you needed to figure out for yourself. And that, I think, is what makes a truly fantastic mentor, is the person who points you in the right direction, but understands that you have to get it. You have to get there on your own.
I love that. Shout out to all my mentors out there that probably I wanted to now say, why don't you just give me a flat out answer? Now I realize that behind the scenes, maybe that's what they're doing, or maybe they're growing too. And they're one of my understandings too is that as particularly, I don't want to table off this topic, go and pivot, but a lot of the mentors are still figuring out themselves too. So like, when you go for them for guidance, they're gonna be like, I don't know everything either. I'm trying to figure it out as I go along.
100%.
So that might be that too. Maybe, I ain't going to shade your mentor there, but she could probably just said, okay, that's her caveat. Was like, oh yes, you finally got the key. I'm glad you came there. In actuality, she was like, I didn't know that thing easy.
Well, because I think it's important for your listeners, right? Like it's not like you finish any degree, a BA or a master's or a PhD, and suddenly you understand all the world. My scholarship and teaching has evolved tremendously, in the 25 years since I finished. So, which I guess ages me a little bit. I was super young when Doogie Howser, PhD. Yeah, no, just kidding. But yeah, of course, like if you're not continuing to stretch and evolve, then you might as well hang it up, right? Like you might as well not be in this game unless you're willing to stretch and think and grow and take in new ideas. Absolutely.
Now, I know, and obviously for me, this is like a way I need to stay on topic, but I definitely want to get to your most recent work. And I think that's probably what I really wanted to pull away from for this episode, policing Black bodies. Before I go to, I definitely want to know, where did that seed plant for this idea? And then just like some of the things that you found through your studies to really feel like this is a topic worth putting into a body of work.
Yeah, thank you. And I love to tell the story of sort of how it came to be. So my co-author and partner and I had been researching the criminal legal system, racism in the criminal legal system, for probably a decade, I would say. Mostly we were working on issues around exoneration. So people who are wrongfully convicted. We had a very good friend who was an exoneree, and we worked closely with him in the community, and we wanted to research like what that experience, how does that happen? What's it like once you come back? And so we had done some writing in those areas, and it was around 2014, 2015 probably is more accurate. Just the barrage of the quote trigger, which is a crazy word to use, was the shooting of unarmed Black men, right? So the TV, the Facebook, the Twitter feed, it was like relentless. It was like it just wasn't stopping. Of course, it starts for many people. It starts with Trayvon Martin, although we can go back to Emmett Till in the 50s. But for a lot of us, it starts with Trayvon Martin, and then it's Mike Brown, and then it's Freddie Gray, and I'm missing a ton of people because it's so many.
So many. Yeah, I was about to say,
right?
You can't even. Yeah, I was about to say, we can't even be hard on ourselves to remember these names because it's so many. I mean, and also, and I don't want to pivot too much, but we forget the transgender community in these conversations with hashtags. But there's so many hashtags. I mean, you can go hashtag crazy
Yeah,
with that, but yeah, go back to your point.
well,
So it's so hard to remember all these names.
yeah, and there's so much, and it's flooding, it's just flooding. And then you started to have the social protests in Ferguson and then in Baltimore. And the light bulb kept kind of going off that in all of the discussions that we saw in the national media, in the mainstream media. I think it was happening more in Black media than it was happening in mainstream media. But it seemed like no one was connecting the dots. People were acting like these things were totally isolated incidents, that they weren't in any, there was no history to it, no historical context, and no connecting the dots. And I think one of the, sort of like moments in the book where it all comes together is Laquan McDonald is murdered in Chicago, shot, I think 17 times in 16 seconds or something crazy like that. And what we knew from our work on exoneration was that Chicago has the highest number of all of the people who've been wrongfully convicted and later exonerated. The hotbed for that is Chicago. So we're saying, okay, let's connect the dots here. Why aren't people seeing that the murder of Laquan McDonald is not an isolated event in terms of the relationship between the police and the Black community? Chicago has a long and tumultuous history of that relationship. And that was really the impetus to write the book, like feeling like we have something to shed light on and help people understand how these things are connected into this larger system of policing Black bodies. So it's not just killing Black people, unarmed Black people, it's also over incarcerating them, stop and frisk, all of those kinds of ways in which we as the white community police the behavior, but also the places Black people can be, right?
And I think that the title is very, kind of goes right to the point, right? I think that, the word Black bodies, I think encompasses more than just the shooting, right? And I think, I'm glad you said different words that kind of, like you're talking about, bodies in regards to legislation and how do we have laws that affect, health, whatever for bodies. You have spatial, restrictions, like where people can go and not. That's part of your body, right? The space you're in. So was that very conscious that you used the word like policing Black, not people? You said bodies. Like why did you use that word? And I know words mean something, so there was something to that.
They do. It's a very deliberate choice, right? And some of it is exactly what you said. We argued in the book that, Trayvon Martin is murdered because he was in a space he wasn't supposed to be, right? If you fast forward to like kind of non-lethal encounters, and again, these happen all the time. They're constantly in your Facebook feed. Amy Cooper calls the police on Christian Cooper in Central Park because a Black man's not supposed to be bird watching. That's policing his body, right? So we wanted to be expansive, but also deliberate in arguing that we police Black people because from the very beginning of the founding of the country, they've not been full citizens. And so rather than the term people, although I believe Black people are people, but we don't treat Black people as full citizens. We have never, and we still don't. And so I think it's a good metaphor for opening that door to say, it's a body that we can mistreat, abuse, lock up, shoot and kill even. A body that has less value historically and today.
So that's very deep. I know with the curiosity and people like, I don't know, I'm the president of the Overthinker Club, that you can go down the rabbit hole, and do too many things. So how did you narrow your focuses on particular topics in sections of your book? Because, obviously you said bodies, that's a very all-encompassing term. We jumped around about legislation and space. So how did you narrow your focus, particularly for the first edition to these are the main pillars of my research? I know I could do a lot, but I really need to just zone in on here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the choices that we made were to choose some obvious things that people would know about, like the shooting of unarmed, at the time in the first edition, the chapter is the shooting of unarmed Black men. In the second edition, that's one of the big things that we changed is as you pointed out, we had neglected Black women's bodies, we had neglected trans bodies. And so we felt like that needed more visibility. So we wanted to choose some things that we knew people knew about, and we wanted to choose some things that we knew they probably didn't know as much about. Exonerations is one of those. Like actually, a lot of people don't know anything about that. And since we'd been writing about it before, that was an obvious choice. Because of the work that we do on gender, we also felt that it was important to specifically talk about Black women's bodies. And in that chapter, which we've also significantly revised for the second edition, we really open up the umbrella to talk about not just locking up Black women or killing unarmed Black women, like Breonna Taylor is a recent example, but also the ways in which, for example, Black women who are incarcerated, if they're pregnant and they give birth during their period of incarceration, the really inhumane, torturous protocol we have in the United States of shackling them to the bed. We shackle pregnant and laboring women to the bed, hands and ankles, while they give birth. And then we rip the baby out of their, literally out of their arms, once it's literally out of the body, out of their arms. And if she's lucky, the baby lands with a family member who can get there in 24 hours to pick the baby up. If not, the baby goes into foster care. There is no reason for that. Like, that is just...
They don't even get that little chest-to-chest time?
No, not really. I mean...
And being a father of two boys, I mean, that's just sad. That actually really hurts my heart right now hearing that, because I know how special that is, with them. I'm picturing my wife in that circumstance, being able to hold our baby for a little bit, after the baby was born.
And now if you can manage it, picture your wife shackled to the arm rails of the bed, hands and feet, and picture that the only person in the room with her, besides the nurse or the doctor who's delivering the babies, is a guy with a gun. And he's not holding her hand, and he's not saying, breathe, focus on your happy place, right? He's not doing any of that. It's awful, and it's unnecessary. And the reason that officials give for it is that the most frequent time when incarcerated people escape is when they're out in the free world going to court or being transported for something. And so everyone has to be shackled. And there are a few cases where people haven't been, and they've been able to, get the guard's gun and shoot their way out. And those are terrible circumstances. But you have a wife and you've been at a birth. And anyone should be able to imagine a woman in labor isn't going anywhere. She's not.
I was going to say, I mean, do they have any evidence? I'm trying to picture a woman like, okay, thank you. I got my, the baby's out. Let me get the gun. Like, I can't even picture that scenario being realistic.
Exactly. It's not realistic. It's not. It's just policing, and it's torture, and it's being mean because you can be. And, we interviewed some women who had that experience, which is what brought it on our radar screen. Like, I had read, technically it's not policy, but it happens all the time. So it's one of those things, like, we say we don't do it, but we do it all the time. But interviewing women who said, in addition to all of that, they're not allowed to call the family member until they're back at the jail, and the family member only has a few hours to come and claim the child. And so why do we make it so hard? Why can't she call before she leaves? Why can't someone from the hospital call? I mean, and the rationale as well, we wouldn't want her to accidentally see a family member or get extra privileges, but come on, right? Like, a few hours a day, 2 days might make the difference that a child goes into a family member's home as opposed to foster care. And that's not dissing foster care. It's just saying, foster care, there are risks for kids who go into foster care, and it's expensive. Taxpayers have to pay for that, right? So we should all care about the fact that this is happening, and it happens every day of the week. 6% of women who are incarcerated have a child during their incarceration, which is, 7,000 babies born a year under these circumstances. And almost all of them are Black, right?
Well, one of the things I'm remarkable is I know that you're not looking at notes right now. You pull that 6% out that means that shows the extent of your research. Like, these numbers are burned in your brain. So
they're burning my brain because
that's crazy. Like, how does that? And then also, like, speak to that, the research part. But then, like, how much of your research, please forgive me, all my listeners, how much of it was stories and not surveys. You know what I'm talking about? Like
Yeah.
please.
Quantitative and qualitative.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
How much was that? So these stories are really impactful.
Mhm. And it's a combination, right? I think what we tried to do, and for your listeners, this is how I approach my research. We tried to use the right kind of data to answer the question we wanted to answer. So if you want to know how many pregnant women give birth while they're incarcerated, then you need the number. But if you want the impact of, and in the book, the woman who we describe, her name is Kezia. If you want to feel Kezia's experience, then we have to tell Kezia's story, right? So it's really what's the most impactful. And I think, the reason I remember those kinds of numbers with they're just, I don't have to look them up, is because they're so powerful, right? They're so powerful. And sometimes it's because they're so enormous, or sometimes it's because they're so small. We tell the story in the chapter on the school to prison pipeline, which is something I didn't know anything about. So how, how do you pick a topic? I thought, and maybe many of your readers already are disabused of this myth, but I thought the school to prison pipeline was pretty just narrow. I thought it was really about, once a juvenile is in the juvenile justice system, they're more likely to go to adult prison. And when we started to research it, we found out that it's super more than that. It's about criminalizing mischief, and locking kids up for mischief, right? Not for crimes, but for mischief. So we tell the story in the book about a young man. We don't name him because he was a juvenile, and so we don't know his name. But he's from Prince William County, right? A place very familiar to any of your listeners who are associated with George Mason. As you know, Mason has a campus in Prince William County. He was in the 7th grade, and he took a carton of milk at lunch, and they called the school resource officer, the SRO.
Oh, no.
And he was handcuffed, arrested, put in the back of a police cruiser, taken down to the jail, and booked on taking a 65-cent carton of milk. 65 cents. And I remember that number because it's so small. It's ridiculous, right? And on top of it, this young man was on free and reduced lunch. So he had every entitlement to that carton of milk. But even if he didn't, seriously, are we going to send kids to jail for taking a carton of milk off the lunch line? Like that's what the school to prison pipeline is really about. And people need to know that. There are 54,000 juveniles, another number I remember because it's way too big. 54,000 juveniles locked up. And that's just the ones in juvenile facilities. We don't actually know what number are locked up in adult prisons. And the majority of those young people are locked up not for violent crime. They're locked up for drug and alcohol use.
Yes, I said, yeah.
Taking a 65-cent carton of milk off the lunch line. There are other cases of kids who were charged, because they took $2.65 of chicken nuggets, who the kid claims the friend just gave them in the lunch line. This is absurd, right? This is the over-policing of, and these are mostly young Black men, the over-policing. And then once they're in the system, then the school to prison pipeline really kicks in, because now they have a prior, right? So if they get in any sort of trouble later on, the judge is going to look back and say, but you have a pattern of criminal behavior. Your listeners probably know the name, I hope they do, of Khalif Browder. So Khalif Browder spent 3 years in Rikers Island, never convicted of, quote, stealing a backpack, right? 3 years in Rikers, over 400 days in solitary confinement. And the argument for why he was there is because he had a prior. When he was like 14, he joyrode a bread truck. That pulled him into the criminal legal system. He now is a prior. So he spends 3 years in prison, jail, never convicted. And even if he had been, it was a backpack, right? And he ends up committing suicide not long after he was released because it was torturous. Yeah. I mean, at 17 years old, he's in solitary confinement. That's absurd. We shouldn't be doing that to anyone, but certainly not. I hope y'all listeners are thinking about your 17-year-old self. Like,
yeah, I am. Yeah. And so, one of the things that really impact me is that, I always go back to, if you want change or doing your research, you hit the heart and you hit the mind. And you're doing that. I mean, I think that's what your stories are. Like, the mind is numbers and stats. That's hitting the logic part. Like, logistically, how does this work? This doesn't make sense. But then the heart is these stories. And I'm actually getting a little bit emotional right now hearing it. So you have that balance between, if you want to make, change, hit the hearts and minds. And technically also with that mind part, you hit the wallet too. Like, look how much money, right? And then you hit the heart, like, oh, this is so sad. But also you hit the mind, like, this is wasteful of money. But how do you, I'm like getting emotional, like hearing these stories.
They're hard. They're horrifying.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you, like I was about to say, how do you take care of, and this is where I, like, for the mind, how do you keep your mind well without being cynical and looking at the world like this is all jacked up and having this overwhelming cynicism of the world, right? That's the logic part. Like, this is all jacked up. Logically, I should be cynical. And then how do you keep the heart intact by still being kind and like optimistic and positive? I mean, that's definitely what the Positive Filter is about. I love to hear the stories, but I also want to know about your experience. I can see writing this stuff, like after you do a chapter, like, dang, let me just close the book. I can't do this research for a day. I need to take a sabbatical on myself, like, how do you balance that?
No, I think that's such a great question. And there's a lot of different answers to it, right? Part of the answer is the book was written as a way to really, for someone who's a writer, the book is the self-care to make sense of what's going on in the world, right? So when you want to shut off your Facebook feed because you can't see another unarmed Black person shot, you just can't look at it anymore. People who are artists, I think, create art. People who are musically inclined create a rap. People who write to work it out. Like, the writing process itself is the working it out, the trying to make sense of it. I think you're really on to important stuff. It's also about, if I believe that there's a way I can contribute to the conversation that will move it forward, and writing is the way to do that, then it's a way to enter the conversation, right? Some people march in the streets, some people write books. We all do it differently, right? So it's kind of about, how is your activism about where you already, like, as I say to students, it's about finding your lane. And so if your lane is, you're an educator and you're a writer, then that's probably where you're going to do it, right? Or at least do it most effectively. Not that you won't do it other places. It's a vehicle to be able to, it's like expanding the size of your classroom, right? So I teach courses on policing Black bodies. I have a chance to talk to students. And as you said, I want them to be emotional. They always ask me, like, how do you do this all the time? Well, what would happen if I stopped? I mean, what would happen if I stopped doing it, right? I mean, not take a vacation from it for a day, but what would happen if I stopped doing it, right? Or stopped feeling it. If I stopped feeling it, then I should get out of the business, because this requires you to feel, right? So the book offers an opportunity to kind of have policing Black bodies class with thousands of people that you never get a chance to meet, right? Which is what's so great about a podcast too.
I was about to say, I was like, I'm feeling, and not just take away from your thing, but like, maybe that's my lane too, because like, I'm definitely not going in the streets. I got kids. I'll tell you right now, I like this analogy. Like, what was it? Someone said it, I can't remember. Like, you can go down there and march. I ain't going down there, but if you come back, I got some bottle of water for y'all. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, I'm supporting y'all. I'm on the sidelines, but I ain't going in there.
Exactly. And you gotta find where your lane is. And for some people, maybe it's, I am willing to give a good amount of money to organizations that do it, right? And I think that when you have classrooms as educators, and this, I have the opportunity to give this information and talk about this stuff with people who will become the next generation of doctors and lawyers and policymakers and cops, right? And all of those things. So for me, what better place to be positioned? Now, that doesn't mean it's not really hard some days. I think doing it collaboratively helps, because it's kind of like having a training partner. The day that you don't feel like going to the gym, your partner's going, yeah, let's go to the gym. Come on, we're going to the gym. I think you laugh when it's funny. I think you allow yourself the whole range of emotions. You cry when it hurts. We've just finished a project that will be the next book, which is on spending time in solitary confinement units, learning about what it's like to be either locked up in one or working in one. They don't call it the hole is the right word, right? Calling it the hole is exactly right. That's exactly what it is. How do you manage that? I'm not going to lie. Like, 'cause I tell everyone the truth. After a day in the hole, you want some comfort food, an adult beverage, and a shower in no particular order, right? So
I would be interested to do that, like one of those experiments. Um, like even I just remember in undergrad, shout out to the alphas, they would do like a night out, like a homeless night out, where you
Yep.
literally with like the cold though, you would do it in a cold day and
Yep.
see like what does it feel like to be in the cold in the dead of winter, you know, with one jacket or something like that. You
Yep.
realize like this is a terrible experience. So I wonder what like for me as an extrovert, that'd probably be my torture. You know what I'm saying? Like,
So I have an assignment for you. So in my
all right,
classes, I have my students do a 24-hour solitary confinement simulation. And so students in my class, now I know you're all running to sign up and come to my class. Students in my classes have to spend 24 hours locked in either a bathroom or a closet. And they can take in a pillow, a sheet, a few pieces of paper and a pen, and one book. And they can be delivered 3 kind of prison style meals across the day by someone who's on the, like, who agrees to be their guard for the 24 hours.
I don't know, man. I don't think the only reason why I don't think this experiment would work for me is my wife would probably still say that's a vacation. You know, talking about like, yeah, I'm gonna be in the bathroom. You handle it. She like, you better get out that bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Help me with these kids. Like I'm doing an experiment. She like,
you got to get out here and help me with the kids.
Yeah. But so I can see that being a terrible, like legit terrible experience.
It is. And a lot of students don't make it the whole 24 hours.
Oh, Lord.
And they write about how they thought, oh, I'll get a lot of homework done. Or, you know, also no phone, no computer, no electronic devices.
Is there no clock?
No clock.
See, that's also, you know, basically, we all know that's a torture technique.
Yep.
When you lose concept of time.
Yep.
Especially, I mean, I'm not saying solitary is all white walls, but there's been an experiment where you put people in all white walls with no, and they lose, like, it could be like 45 minutes, and they thought they were in there for like 4 days.
And the students report that exactly.
Your time is all off, you know?
Yep, your time is all off.
And so we're basically doing it, but we're doing it in an actual institution.
And on purpose, right?
Yeah,
and on purpose.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
I can tell. And I mean, I bet now that we see that, we can also see example, like you said,
Khalif Browder.
Yeah, like doing that multiple times would make anyone break.
Oh, it totally does. I mean, I think most people see a decline in their mental health within 24 hours. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. Some people have argued that people actually begin to lose IQ points after a certain amount of time in solitary confinement. So it's mental health, it's cognitive function. We're working on the book right now, and one of the people who was reviewing it said, well, you know, by research standards, you're not supposed to study people who have mental illness, right? Because they can't necessarily consent fully to the process. And my response was, then you couldn't interview anyone in solitary confinement, because within 24 hours, people begin to show symptoms of mental illness. Yep, all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely gonna do a pivot to a positive. So what has been an unexpected positive from your research? Unexpected positive from the creation of this book, whether that's unexpected legislation that changed, or, you know, you say a group of people say, thank you so much for sharing my story. What was some unexpected thing?
Yeah, no, that's
really was
awesome.
like, wow, this fueled me for my research. This is a positive. This is something that's gonna give me some, you know, fill my cup up, whatever.
Fill my cup. Yeah. Well, I think I've certainly had a number of students who have changed their career trajectory as a result of reading the book and taking the class. So they now, you know, want to become, they had always wanted to go to law school. Now they want to focus on social justice law. They want to focus on human rights law. So they've kind of pivoted, which I hope speaks to you, Philip, right? They're switching of their vocations. Yeah. Certainly, this is probably one of the most unexpected positive things that came out. Um, so I put some stuff about the book on Facebook, and like we do, right? You got to advertise, you got to sell a book.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
put some stuff about the book on Facebook. And now I grew up in Minnesota. It's, as I tell people, the only place whiter is probably Iceland. It's very white, except in Minneapolis, as we know, because of the murder of George Floyd, but
Yeah.
it's a very white place. It's not necessarily conservative, but it's, people,
Mhm. It's a
it's,
bubble. It's a bubble.
it's a bubble. And so I got a ping from someone that I went to high school with who's a cop. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to be good, right? Because a lot of people misunderstand the book is not anti-police, right? The book
I
is,
love it. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Not that we don't have many recommendations for how to police better, but
Yeah.
I thought, oh, this is going to be a zinger. And he's a white guy, and he wrote and he said, everything you wrote about this is exactly right. Like this, you nailed it. And I was like, dang, that's a pretty big compliment, and it was very unexpected, right? And then I think probably the other thing is a lot of people who said exactly what we had hoped, which was, I understood a piece of it, but your book helped me connect the dots. I understood, one little part of it, but the book really helped me to see how it's a whole system of, as we say in the book, the phrase is removing Black bodies from the social political economy, that incarceration is on purpose, it's deliberate, and it's meant to keep Black people from accessing the opportunity structure. That's the whole point of it. And a lot of people who even work in the system like just hadn't thought about that sort of larger. So it's nice when you feel like you set out to write the book to draw the connections, right? And that someone actually experiences it that way, which is pretty cool.
I love it. Well, this is the part of the unexpected part of the show. I call it shot for shot.
All righty.
I think that's a definitely good segue into this. You get to ask me any random question you want related to this topic or not, and I get to ask you one. Do you want to go first? So I go first.
Can you go first so I can think?
Yeah. So mine is you're from the Midwest, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some things, obviously, what are some things that the Midwest gets right that the rest of the country needs to jump on board? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that could be anything. It could be the food. It could be anything. Like, man, us Midwesters, we get this right. Y'all need to, learn from us.
Need to get on the ball. That's a great question. I would say I'm going to give you two answers. One is some food. So if you have not had a deep fried cheese curd, you have missed out on life. And you should run out and get one. And don't bother getting one at some place like a fast food restaurant that says we have cheese curds, because all that is a piece of cheese. You got to have a cheese curd, legit. I think another thing that Midwesterners get right is, compared to other places, like I feel like the South, where I've also lived, people are all up in your business all the time. They tell you nice things and then they stab you in the back. I feel like East Coasters are like, where I'm also living. Yeah. Midwestern, busy. I think Midwesterners are an interesting combination of that. They're hospitable, they're welcoming, but they're not all up in your business. So it's kind of whatever you do doesn't bother me. Like, just don't bother me and I won't bother you. But I'll still bring you a pie on the 4th of July or whatever.
Yeah. I definitely get the vibe. But that's what my military brat just being around. Like, we could talk about like there's subcultures in cultures. There's definitely a vibe. There's definitely a vibe, and definitely with as a Black person particularly, we're not monolithic. You know what I'm saying? Like there's different swags and different regional things. So definitely shout out to the Midwest and all the different ones. So that was my question. Yeah.
All right. So let me see. So this is fun. I like this. So what is the most impactful thing that you think you have done professionally and personally?
Oh man.
I cheated. That's kind of two questions, but.
No, I mean, honestly, hopefully I'm not done. So that's a to be continued answer. But I could say, like, I'm looking right now at my my thank you board, all these notes. And I don't know, like, I feel like as an educator, I definitely seen the trajectory of changing people's lives. And the positive part, I think about unsung heroes is that mine is not necessarily unsung so much because I get to see the people I've helped become great. I get to see the students. So I think anything where it's an interaction with students, I would even go deeper with deeper relationships, like mentoring students or having the like old uncle relationship with some of my alpha brothers and the younger ones and stuff like that. So I would say that, like the most impactful thing for me is seeing tangibly lives that I've been a part of and kind of similar to you, go and do great things. I love the line, I don't know if I made it up or heard it somewhere, but like in the story of your life, if I could just be one sentence and you do big thing, like you got like a biography, right? Like John Lewis, and there was like that one sentence was like, I was in college and I had a really good teacher named Philip Wilkerson. That's it, one sentence. Yeah. I'm stunting. I'm claiming it. That's like, I'm taking 100%. That one sentence and running with it. So I'd say the most impactful thing is for me to have direct relationships with certain people, students, mentees, all that. And then
let me pause you quick. Do you have one that has really surprised you in ways you didn't expect?
Surprised me.
You thought.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. Like some of them, like recently, I can say one was that it's one of those. The most surprising ones are the ones that come out of nowhere years later, and so I do have one top of mind. One was I was a admissions counselor for VCU, helping students get into VCU through Nova, right? But I helped a student, and this student didn't get into VCU, right? He got into Mason, but I still talked to him. I told him about my experience at Mason. I said, just if you need anything, let me know. He went on to Mason and did great things. Like,
that's awesome.
Totally separate from me. I randomly connected with him recently on LinkedIn, and he said, Philip, thank you so much for helping me, even helping me make the decision. I think he got into both schools, and I didn't do my job. I was like, this is one of those times where I didn't sell VCU. I was like, go to Mason, do what you need to do. Get your life, think of these factors, right? Like, I don't work for a VCU no more, so I don't even get in trouble for saying that I didn't convince a student not to go there. But he followed me on LinkedIn, and like I said, I even forgot I met him. To be honest with you, I don't remember all the students I helped. He's like, well, I see what you're doing. I went to Mason. I love, what I'm doing at when I studied, but now I work for the Coast Guard as, kind of like the HR realm, whatever. I would love to connect with you and learn about your experience in the career development realm. And I've seen what you're doing, and you inspired me and all this stuff. And, definitely, just want to connect. And I was like, who? Like, I was like, that was just unexpected. Like, I was like, this was just an admissions role. I was just supposed to get them into schools. And I didn't think just being nice or talking to him I probably met him like 3 times, maybe 2 or 3 times. I don't remember every student I met, but those are the ones that he surprised. Yeah, that's the most recent one. Come out of nowhere. They've been following me on LinkedIn or something, or Facebook or Twitter. I think he actually he didn't even connect with me on LinkedIn. Somehow he found my Instagram and hit me with an Instagram message, see what you're doing. And I was like, all right, cool. Great to see what you're doing too. So that was an unexpected one for sure.
That's such a great story. And it's exactly the story that you asked me to tell about my mentor, because essentially you just did the same thing for this person. You said, you got to figure it out, right? What I can do is give you some information, but you got to figure it out, right? That's such a great story.
Yeah, I don't know how to think about that. Like, I definitely love the unexpected, and I have no problem saying too, who, who, he was like, and he broke it. And then when he broke it down, it clicked at that point, it did click. So I definitely did not, I did remember him specifically after he broke down. I mean, he came through with some facts. I remember meeting you there, this and this is what we talked about. And I was like, oh, okay, good. Got it.
Right.
But that's also going to say, like, I tell all the listeners too, that is why day-to-day interactions are so impactful, and making sure that whoever you work with or meet with, you treat them with the same standard, because you don't know if that one instance could turn them off completely from a career, or if that one instance could make them, 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 or if that one or it could turn them on just because of one conversation. I even had colleagues that said that like they would shout out, like I've met students now at Mason that work in higher ed that have shouted out some of my colleagues. They said, I met with one of your colleagues and she inspired me to get into higher ed. And it was like, and she was like, and I was there for a career appointment and I didn't even go into the, like, they didn't even go into the career that they were doing the appointment for. They went into higher ed because they said, oh, what do you do? What do you do with your job? And that was those are the craziest stories to me. So.
Well, and it's to your point, right? They speak to, you don't know how you're going to impact someone. So if you try to just impact everyone positively, some of that sticks and you don't have any idea when it's going to, right?
Also, shout out to my teacher, Holbrook. I took a class in 10th grade and it was a Black male class, and unexpectedly, about 70% of those classes, 70% of the classmates that I had, some found a way into education. And I talked to Holbrook and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I was trying to inspire y'all. Why didn't y'all go into business to make money?
Exactly.
He was like, y'all not supposed to be like me. Y'all supposed to go.
Exactly.
And that's the same thing I said. I was like, I'm glad I was positive, but I thought y'all maybe go somewhere and make more money.
And then donate some money, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Like, I say that to them, like, yo, because of you, I want to get into education. I said, I'm sorry.
I love it.
Like, hey, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. So we're at the part of the show. This is wonderful. Definitely going to put your second edition of your book in the show notes so people can follow along and get it and listen to it.
Awesome.
But this is the part of the show I call shout outs and plugs. What that means is you have an opportunity to shout out anyone you want to show love to, and then plugs all the ways that you feel comfortable with listeners connecting with you and also the things you're working on, aka your book. So the stage is set. Shout outs and plugs.
Shout outs and plugs. Oh my gosh. Okay. Shout outs. Wow. That would take a whole show. I'm indebted to a heck of a lot of people. Shout out to you, Philip, for having me on the show. Shout out to my co-author, Earl Smith. Shout out to my mentor. I already mentioned her, Emily Kane. Shout out to everybody. And the list is really long. Whoever gave me a chance, everybody who hired me, who thought maybe I could do that. Again, that's a long list of people, but one that will resonate with Mason listeners would be Suzanne Scott Constantine, who hired me to come to Mason. Tons of folks at Mason who, nothing gets done by itself. Have to show love to Wendy Manuel Scott for sure. Kim Eby, Rose Pascarell, people who, supported me along the way. Lots of parents, of course, kids who don't necessarily get a shout out, but your kids also, I think, help you make you who you are. So those folks are important. Plugs, love for people, to get involved in the conversation, right? Like that's really what we want, is to be in, so of course you want to sell books, but you want to be in the conversation. So Policing Black Bodies, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at the publisher's website, which is raumanandlittlefield.com. Love to have you follow us on our personal website, which is www.smithandhattery.com. So www.smithandhattery.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We want to be in the conversation. So, hopefully you'll buy a book, but also in some way participate in the conversation would be fantastic.
And I'm just curious, is there going to be any future, or is it already on Audible as well to listen to?
We have not gotten the publisher to do an Audible yet. So it is on ebook, but not Audible. Yes. So, hey, shout out is, can I find somebody that wants to record it on Audible?
Yeah.
Because I think we'd reach a whole nother market.
Oh, you know me, I'm ripping and running. I listen to my books and I'm definitely gonna get your book, but I love to listen to, because it's a way that, for me, the person that can't sit still.
Well, it's also so great for people who live in places like Northern Virginia where you got to commute, right?
Yes,
It's a way to use that time.
Yes.
So find me somebody, help me find somebody who can convert it to Audible.
Plugs. If you do Audible books or you get the studio and the recording, let's get it done. But I love it. But thank you so much for spending your time today. I'm very appreciative. We definitely will have to do a follow-up in the future. Also keep you connected with all the listeners. Please follow all the things I put in the resources. I mean, these are important conversations. You see me taking notes. I'm taking notes on things for me to grow. So please, I hope you enjoyed this episode and you learned something just as much as I learned something today. Positive Filter, please share these episodes with your family and friends. If you have any questions for the podcast, please call 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. That's the hotline. Share this episode with your family and friends, spread positivity, and show love. And we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.